Welcome to a place where love isn't just told, it's felt, where strangers meet not by choice, but by fate, and what begins as silence slowly turns into the language of the heart. This isn't a fairy tale, it's a journey through emotion, where duty becomes devotion, and two lost souls learn what it means to surrender, to trust, and to become one. Every heartbeat, every glance, every quiet breath in this story carries a truth we all know deep inside, that sometimes the greatest love stories are born from the most unexpected beginnings. Stay with me and let your heart listen between the words. Because tonight you'll hear not just a story, but a feeling. It wasn't love that led to the wedding, it was life. Circumstances, family expectations, decisions made too quickly and too quietly. Two people standing before one another with barely any shared history, yet bound by words neither had fully understood until they were spoken aloud. The sound of vows echoed like something distant, something unreal. There was no thunder in the heart, no rush of destiny, only the still weight of what had just begun. The first days passed like slow rain. There was politeness, careful distance, and the awkward rhythm of two strangers trying to breathe the same air. The house felt too large, too quiet. Every movement echoed, every silence lingered, and yet there was a strange comfort in the presence of another heartbeat nearby. Not love, not yet, but something waiting, something uncertain and fragile. Mornings began with the same stillness, a shared table, 2 cups of tea, eyes that never met for long. Words were few. There was kindness in the way he poured the tea, a quiet respect in the way he waited before leaving for work. Sometimes that small courtesy felt like a thread, thin but strong enough to hold together what could have easily fallen apart. Days turned into weeks. The house started to change. Small things, flowers by the window, laughter from the neighbors outside, a warm meal left waiting on the table, began to fill the empty spaces. It wasn't a transformation anyone could see, but it was there, like a slow sunrise breaking through clouds. There were moments when time seemed to pause, just long enough to notice the softness of his voice, the way his eyes lingered as if trying to understand what couldn't be spoken. One evening, the power went out. The house sank into darkness, and for the first time they sat close. A single candle flickered between them, light catching on his face, turning the air heavy with unspoken things. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt alive like the space between two heartbeats. He asked softly if she was afraid of the dark. The answer came out quieter than a whisper. No, not anymore. Something shifted in that moment, something neither could name. After that night, the silences changed. They began to share small things. Stories from childhood, laughter that came without trying, glances that lasted longer than they should. The distance that once felt safe began to disappear, replaced by something neither had planned for. It was not sudden, not dramatic. It was slow, patient, like the way the tide rises without anyone noticing until it touches your feet. The first time their hands brushed, it felt like the world had paused to listen. It wasn't deliberate. It happened between 2 gestures, 2 breaths, but it stayed, an electric moment, soft and trembling. From then on, every small touch carried meaning. The space between them felt charged with quiet longing, a kind of closeness that didn't need words. Nights grew warmer. The air in the room felt different, alive with something tender, almost sacred. Conversations drifted deeper. They began to share hopes, fears, regrets. He spoke about his dreams, about things he had never said aloud. There was no judgment, no pretense, just listening and the feeling of being truly seen. That kind of honesty is rare. It changes the air you breathe. There were still days of silence, of uncertainty, of distance. But love was already finding its way through the cracks. It wasn't the kind of love sung about or written in books. It was quiet, raw, and real. It grew out of small gestures, the way he waited by the gate when she was late, the way she remembered his favorite cup, the way they both started smiling without knowing why. Love didn't arrive like a storm. It unfolded like dawn, gentle but unstoppable. There came a night when rain fell harder than ever before. The sound filled the house, steady and endless. They sat by the window, the world outside hidden by water and shadows. He reached out, not suddenly, not boldly, but as though the moment had been waiting all along. Fingers touched, warmth met warmth. The silence between them broke without a single word. There was no promise, no declaration, just the quiet truth that two hearts, once strangers, had found their rhythm. From that night onward, everything changed. The house that once felt like walls began to feel like home. Laughter returned, soft and unplanned. Mornings came with shared glances and unspoken understanding. Even arguments, small, human, real, only deepened what was already there. They weren't perfect, but love rarely asks for perfection. It asks for presence, for choosing each other again and again, even when it's difficult. What began as duty had become devotion. The marriage that started in silence now carried the sound of two lives intertwining, growing, healing. The stranger from that first day was no longer a stranger. Somewhere between the quiet tea mornings and the rain-soaked nights, two hearts had learned the language of belonging. Sometimes, love doesn't come with fireworks or fate. It comes quietly, hidden beneath ordinary days. It waits in shared glances, in patience, in forgiveness. It begins where fear ends, and it grows where trust takes root. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't ask for permission. It simply becomes everything. Because sometimes, the most beautiful love stories are not the ones we choose, but the ones that choose us. There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than words ever can. It begins softly, like a hum beneath the skin, a quiet pulse that grows stronger with every stolen glance. It happened in moments too small to name. The way his eyes lingered just a little too long. The way a breath caught between us when we passed each other in the hallway. Nothing was said, yet everything was felt. The house had its rhythm now, a quiet harmony between two hearts learning how to exist together. Days flowed easily, but beneath the calm, something deeper stirred. There were moments when distance felt like ache, when an accidental brush of hands carried the weight of everything left unspoken. The air would thicken, time would slow, and suddenly even silence had meaning. One evening, while folding clothes, fingers met unexpectedly. It lasted only a heartbeat, but that heartbeat echoed through the room, through the walls, through everything. Neither pulled away right away. There was no need for apology, no laughter to hide the moment. Just a quiet understanding, a silent recognition that something had shifted. It wasn't desire in its loudest form. It was quieter, more dangerous. It asked for nothing, yet promised everything. After that, every moment seemed charged with invisible electricity. A shared look across the table could unravel calm. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway made the air tremble. Even ordinary things, a glass placed gently on the counter, a door opening late at night, became signs of something growing between us. Words would have ruined it. It needed silence to breathe. Sometimes, there were nights when sleep refused to come. The soft sound of rain outside would pull thoughts to places they shouldn't go. In the darkness, distance felt unbearable. The mind replayed every look, every touch, every pause that had meant more than either dared to admit. There was a yearning that didn't need to be named. It simply lived quietly and completely beneath the surface of daily life. There was one night when the air itself seemed to hum. The power had gone again, and the world outside was soaked in rain. Candles burned low, and shadows danced on the walls. He sat near the window, the faint light catching the edge of his face. The silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast. Every sound, the flicker of flame, the breath drawn in, felt louder than a shout. He turned then, slowly, and the look in his eyes stole the air from the room. It wasn't longing alone, it was understanding. A recognition of everything we hadn't said. There was no need for a word. In that gaze, every question found its answer, every doubt faded. The candlelight trembled, as if it too could feel the weight of what hung between us. From that night on, something invisible connected us. Even in the midst of ordinary moments, there was a quiet pull. When laughter happened, it lingered. When sadness came, comfort needed no invitation. Sometimes our hands would almost meet, stopping just short, because what lived in that almost was more powerful than touch itself. The ache of distance became the proof of how real it had become. Days would pass where neither spoke of it. Life continued, simple and steady, yet each time the eyes met, the silence flared alive again. It was both torment and peace, a contradiction that made the heart race and calm at once. There was a truth between us, wordless but undeniable. It said, "I see you, I feel you, I am here, even when I cannot reach you." There came a morning when light spilled through the window, soft and golden. He was sitting quietly, reading. The sunlight touched his face, and something inside just stopped. Watching him there, so ordinary, so unaware of how deeply he had been seen, felt like falling without moving. The heart can speak in silence, and that morning it did. It said everything that language could never hold. In time, words began to appear in small forms. Simple questions, gentle gestures, a shared joke that lingered longer than it should. But even then, silence was where the truth lived. It wasn't absence anymore. It was home. It was where everything real existed, where every glance was a confession and every breath was a promise. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, when the world had settled, that silence would return like a living thing. It would wrap around like warmth, and the memory of every small touch would come rushing back. There was no guilt, no hesitation, only the deep knowing that love had arrived quietly, patiently, without demanding attention. Love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it hides in the pauses between them, in the stillness that two hearts share when they finally learn to listen without speaking. Every heartbeat becomes its own sentence. Every look its own story. The body remembers what the tongue never dared to say, and that is how the silence between two strangers became the language of something endless, something that neither could explain, but both could feel completely. Because sometimes the most powerful confessions are made without a sound. There was a time when pride was the only armor left to wear. It stood between two hearts that had already begun to reach for each other, pretending the distance was safety. Words came carefully, measured, so nothing too real would escape. The heart was cautious, the mind even more so. After all, it was easier to remain polite than to be known, easier to appear strong than to admit how much every look had begun to matter. But love doesn't wait for permission. It moves quietly, uninvited, until one day it becomes impossible to hide. The first crack appeared on an ordinary afternoon. He had come home late, weary from the day. Something in his face carried exhaustion that went beyond work. Without thinking, a hand reached out to touch his arm. It was a simple gesture, small, instinctive, but in that touch, pride faltered. He looked up, startled, and for the first time there was no distance in his eyes. Just gratitude and something softer that neither dared to name. After that, the silence between them was different. It wasn't avoidance anymore. It was waiting, waiting for courage, waiting for truth. Every evening carried the same quiet anticipation, like standing at the edge of something that could either heal or destroy. And somewhere in that waiting, fear began to lose its hold. One night, a storm broke outside. The sky roared and rain pounded against the windows. Inside, it felt strangely calm. He stood near the light, reading something he wasn't really reading. The sound of thunder drew him closer, perhaps without thought, until there was only a breath between them. The moment stretched, too fragile to touch, too powerful to resist. And then, finally, words found a way out. Not confessions, not grand declarations, just truth spoken softly enough to tremble. "I don't know when it changed," he said, voice unsteady. Neither did I, but it had. Walls that once felt safe had become prisons. The fear of being hurt had turned into a fear of never being truly seen. So the walls began to fall, not all at once, but piece by piece. Each shared glance, each honest word, each moment of silence stripped away another layer of protection until there was nothing left to hide behind. Love, when it comes honestly, demands to be met bare. And that's what happened. Vulnerability replaced pride, and in its place came peace. a fragile, beautiful kind of peace that only exists when two people stop pretending. Days after that night felt lighter. Laughter came easily again. Sometimes he would reach for a hand without thinking. Sometimes eyes would meet across the room and nothing else would matter. The world outside could have been falling apart, and still, those small moments would have been enough. But love also brings its own fears. The fear of losing, of breaking what feels too rare to exist. There were nights when that fear returned, whispering that nothing this real could last. Yet even in those moments, there was comfort in knowing the heart had already chosen. It wasn't about forever, it was about truth, about feeling something so genuine, and it no longer needed to be defended. One evening, he came home carrying news that wasn't good. Life had its weight again, heavy and familiar. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he let the truth spill out, all the frustration, the worry, the self-doubt he had hidden behind calm eyes, the strength it took to show that weakness was greater than anything else. And listening, just listening, became the most sacred thing in the world. That night, the connection deepened in a way that didn't need touch or words. It was in the simple act of being seen, of saying, without speaking, you don't have to face it alone anymore. It was then that love transformed from desire into devotion, from something that burned to something that endured. There was beauty in the ordinary after that. Sharing breakfast in quiet mornings, folding clothes together, walking home under fading sunlight. All of it carried warmth. The heart no longer searched for perfection. It found meaning in small things. The way he smiled when she forgot something. The way he looked back before leaving the room. The way silence no longer felt empty. One day, while tending to the garden, he stood watching in the doorway. The wind carried laughter across the space between them, and he said something simple, something about how strange it felt that what began without choice had become everything that mattered. The words didn't need a reply. The heart already answered with a smile. Time passed. Life kept shifting. But the love that had once been built on uncertain ground now stood steady. It wasn't flawless, and it wasn't loud. It had grown roots, deep, invisible, unbreakable. What started as a duty had become a choice, made again each day without hesitation. Fear no longer had a place. Vulnerability had turned from weakness into strength. To love was no longer to risk. It was to live. And the greatest truth learned was that love doesn't demand grand gestures. It asks only for honesty and the courage to stay when everything in you once feared leaving. Sometimes it's not the loud confessions that define love. It's the quiet acts of faith, the willingness to be open, to trust that what you give won't be broken. That's how the heart heals. That's how two people, once strangers, become home. Because real love isn't about finding someone who never causes pain, it's about finding someone worth facing the fear for. There came a time when every barrier that once stood between two souls simply dissolved. It didn't happen all at once, nor through any single moment of clarity. It happened quietly, through countless small acts of understanding, through the ache of longing that grew gentler each time it was met with kindness. What began as a bond of circumstance had turned into something unexplainable, something sacred, fragile, and frighteningly real. There was no longer fear in being seen. Every flaw, every scar, every unspoken part of the past had been laid bare, and instead of judgment, there was acceptance. There was no pretending, no hiding behind masks of composure. The heart had already surrendered, and surrender, when born of love, is not weakness. It is a kind of freedom. There were nights when silence spoke everything that words could not. A glance across the room was enough to tell 1,000 stories. The space between them was no longer filled with uncertainty, but with quiet knowing. When hands met, it wasn't just touch, it was recognition, a remembering of something ancient, as if the souls had always known each other and were only now finding their way back. There was a gentleness in how love began to live in every part of life. It was in the laughter that rose easily from shared jokes, in the way time slowed when one lingered in the other's gaze, in the small acts of care that no one else saw. Love no longer needed to announce itself. It simply was, woven into the rhythm of every day. But love also came with pain. There were moments when distance returned, not the physical kind, but the kind that comes when two people realize how deeply they now belong to each other. The thought of loss became unbearable, the possibility of hurt more real than ever. It's strange how love can make one both stronger and more fragile at the same time. Yet even in pain, there was beauty, because to feel so deeply was proof of something pure. There was a day when words led to misunderstanding, when silence turned heavy again, and pride tried to build walls once more. For hours neither spoke. The house felt colder, the air sharper. Yet underneath it all, the heart still reached out, still waited. And when forgiveness finally came, it was not through words, but through tears that fell freely and hands that found each other again. That was the moment the love became unbreakable, not because it was perfect, but because it had survived imperfection. There is something sacred in the way love teaches patience. It teaches that sometimes the most powerful thing one can do is stay. Stay when it's easier to run. Listen when silence feels safer. Love when the heart feels tired. Through each test, through each moment of doubt, two souls learn to trust not in certainty, but in each other. In time, even pain began to feel like part of the bond, proof that what existed between them was alive and human. Every argument, every reconciliation carved deeper lines of truth. Every moment of weakness was met with compassion, and in that compassion, love grew roots too deep to be torn away. There was an evening unlike any other. The sky had turned violet, the world hushed beneath the soft weight of twilight. The two sat close, their shoulders touching, the air thick with the warmth of everything they had been through. No grand words were spoken, no promises made. Yet in that quiet closeness, something eternal seemed to unfold. The feeling was not of falling in love again, but of becoming love itself, of belonging so completely that the boundary between two hearts disappeared. To love someone that deeply is to see both their strength and their fear, their light and their shadows, and still choose them entirely. It is to recognize that love is not a perfect state but a living thing, one that demands care, patience, forgiveness. It is to realize that two strangers who once walked separate paths can merge so completely that their silence sounds the same, their hearts move in rhythm, their breaths find harmony. Time moved differently after that. There was no more counting of days or waiting for moments. Every glance, every touch carried the quiet certainty that this connection, this shared breath, was home. The world outside continued in its chaos, but inside that love there was stillness. A kind of peace that only comes when the soul knows it has found its place. There were still moments of fear, because real love always carries a hint of danger. The danger of losing, the danger of giving too much. But even that fear became part of the beauty, because love, when it is true, is never safe. It is meant to be lived fully, risked completely, trusted blindly. It is meant to break you open so you can finally see what it means to be whole. Years may pass, seasons may shift, but the memory of becoming one never fades. It remains in the smallest gestures, in the way a name sounds when spoken softly, in the comfort of a familiar hand, in the heartbeat that answers another without hesitation. What began as a union of strangers became a sacred story of two souls who dared to love beyond fear, beyond pride, beyond anything the world could understand. Because sometimes love isn't found. It's built, lowly, painfully, beautifully, until two become one, and what once felt like chance begins to feel like destiny. And in that quiet destiny, there is peace. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it fade. Like, share, and subscribe for more tales of real, deep love that speak to the soul. Your heart deserves stories that remind it what love truly feels like. Until next time, stay open, stay kind, and never stop believing in love that finds you when you least expect it.